This is really a pleasure for me to be, uh, you know, listening to and interacting with such eminent personalities, and especially the Delhi alumni chapter has been very active in doing this. Sandeep Chakravarti, our alumni from PFM 1989, has organized and has been the driving force behind this kind of series of talks that we're having, and I'm really excited to be able to do this from IFM side. Um, Let us, without further ado, start. And we're going to be interacting. Sandeep Chakravarti Saab is going to be interacting with Mr. Srinivas Gotru and Mr. Koloru Krishnan. Let me tell you, for those of you who don't know about Sandeep Chakravarti Saab, he's from one of our first batches of IIFM from PFM 1989, and he has from assumed various roles, but primarily he's from the Indian Foreign Service. And so welcome to this Chakravarti Saab. If you could just tell us, how was your journey from IFM to where you are now with the Foreign Service, and what kind of whether you are still connected with the environment, what kind of job roles see yourself. If you could just tell us that, and then I would request you then kindly take over. One housekeeping announcement before that is that this session will last for approximately an hour, and once we finish the interactions, please type your questions in the chat box, and then Sandeep Chakravarti Saab will then kind of coordinate and ask these questions. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Advait. Please call me Sandeep. Don't use Sir or Sahib. We are more or less contemporaries. Thank you. I would first just thank my colleague Srinivas Gotru and I would say another colleague, Mr. Koloru Krishnan, for joining us and sparing the valuable time. I will get into detailed introductions in a short while. But before I do that, I will just respond to what Advait asked me. Is that I passed out in 1991 from IIFM. And when we were in IIFM, IIFM was an institute ahead of its time. There was not much awareness and consciousness about environmental issues. And in that way, ours were the pioneering batch. And I worked in watershed management organizations for about 5 years. And then I don't know what happened to me, and I wrote the civil service examination and I joined the Foreign Service. But I must say that what I learned in IIFM has been with me ever since, and it has made me more conscious, more aware of my environment, and thankfully in my assignments in various parts of the world, whenever I've got a chance to do something for the environment, I have done. And I can offhand recollect 2 projects that I have done, quite successful. One was in Peru when I was ambassador there. The government offered some assistance to Peru, and they asked me to design a project. And Lima is a desert, and the hills around Lima were all deserts, and there were shanties there. And I visited one of them, and I felt so sad that there was not a single tree in that shanty. So I worked with the community there, and we did an afforestation project. And today that community is still in touch with me, and they send me pictures now and then, videos of how the trees are doing, and it has totally revolutionized the living conditions in that place, where people have become more caring. Every household has a tree to itself, and I felt that I was able to make a difference in the lives of people in that very poor neighborhood of Lima. Then when I was in New York, government of India was celebrating 150th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, and we were all asked to think of innovative projects. So I thought about planting 150 trees in memory of Gandhiji. And I must say that what we designed was a very unique project, where we collaborated with a university, the State University of New York, which gave us land free of charge. So getting land in New York is something. And then what I thought, out of my own NGO experience was, I reached out to people and asked people to sponsor trees in the name of their parents, in the name of their gurus, in the name of their gods. And the response was incredible. And within few weeks, we were able to raise $75,000. And the entire project was financed by people's contribution. We didn't take even a cent from the government. And I was very happy when Prime Minister Modi inaugurated it in 2019 in September, when he had gone for the UN General Assembly meeting. So, as I said, my training, my learning in IIFM has always been with me. And now that I'm back in the headquarters as Joint Secretary Europe West, I facilitate the involvement of our European partners in climate change discussions, in environmental issues, in clean energy. And I have worked very closely with my colleague Srinivas, who has been one of our COP26 negotiators. But there's great deal of interest from Europe, UK, France, Germany, EU in engaging with us in climate change issues. And there, I am not in the forefront. It is Srinivas who is in the forefront. But in the back room and in facilitating, we do play a role. So here again, I find that since I have interest and some kind of exposure to climate and environmental issues, I am more active, and I can understand where people are coming from. So this is all about me. I am not the main speaker today, and I will now pivot towards the main speakers. Let me start with Srinivas Gothru. He is an Indian Foreign Service officer. He has served in various capitals, but essentially he is a Chinese expert. He speaks Chinese fluently. He also heads, he wears two hats. One is Joint Secretary in our UN Economic and Social Divisions dealing with social and economic issues. But he is also Joint Secretary in a think tank of MEA, which deals with China. So if you have any China questions, you can of course ask him. I'm not sure whether he will be able to answer it in a public forum. But Srinivas has served in Beijing, he has served in London, he has served in the ministry, and I think he also served in San Francisco. So he has experience of several continents, and for the last 3 years he has been in headquarters. And very interestingly for all of us in this room, he was in COP26, he was in Glasgow, and he was there. Many of us must have seen him in the last moments on the stage with our negotiator, our minister, and the COP26 president. So, Srini, I will start with you, and I wanted to ask you, when you went to COP26, what was India's main objectives? What were you trying to do a holding operation, or were you ambitious, or what was our negotiating posture in COP26?
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks for the kind introduction. I hope my voice is audible. I'm just kind of getting out of a throat infection, so the throat is. I don't know if this volume level is adequate.
It is good. It's very good.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the introduction again. And it's a great pleasure to be here to talk to students. I must say that I'm seeing that there are about 40 plus students who are participating in this event on the Saturday evening on climate change. I am quite impressed that there's so much of interest in COP26 and what we do. I think just one thing I wanted to add about climate change, the nature of climate change negotiations and how government's approach is. It's such a cross-cutting issue that there are several departments which are involved, several ministries, organizations at the central level, at the state level, at the local level. So it's a cross-cutting, economy-wide sort of a discussion which has a lot of significance for every country that is part of these discussions, and India is no exception. So in India's case, I think the lead, of course, is our Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Environment, Forests, and Climate Change. And I mean, most of you who would have followed the discussion would have seen that our Minister Environment himself was the leader of the delegation for COP26 negotiations. And there is involvement of practically about 8 to 10 other ministries at the ministry level: Ministry of Environment, new and renewable energy, power, electricity, Bureau of Energy Efficiency. There's so many, and Ministry of External Affairs is one of those. So we are part of that team which goes for these negotiations. And this conference of parties, basically this is the 26th sort of conference of parties, and there was it's also it was coming in terms of the significance for it was that it is after Paris Agreement, so it was really the first year of implementation of Paris Agreement, and therefore we went there with some expectations that the unfinished agenda of Paris would be completed. Last year it was postponed because of the pandemic, so it was held this year, the 26th conference. And so the unfinished agenda in terms of the Paris rule book, there were various aspects of it in terms of adaptation, loss and damage, Article 6, the carbon markets issues. So these were all unresolved issues which were kind of in the negotiations under this, and we were looking forward to ensuring that there were issues of concern to us. There were important issues which we wanted certain sort of outcomes. So we were hoping for those outcomes. We went prepared with that kind of agenda. We also had an ambitious sort of agenda in terms of raising our overall sort of goals for on climate action, not just on the reducing the emission side, but also increasing our renewable non-fossil energy mix. So there was a mix of both in that sense, and so that was, and plus there were other important aspects like technology and finance, and we wanted to progress those issues as well. It's a global discussion, so there are the expectations are always have to be tempered with what everybody can agree. So unless everybody agrees, and these are decisions basically made by consensus. So if everybody is on board, only then will you agree to a particular point. So while for the uninitiated observer might think that the progress is a little slow, it is a mammoth effort to get about 180 plus parties to come on board and then agree on specific issues and then progress the overall agenda for climate action. So I think our objectives were quite clear. What we went with, we wanted to showcase our efforts to the world and tell them what our future plans were. We also wanted to make sure that the unfinished agenda of Paris would kind of go in a direction which is beneficial to us, and us by us meaning a large number of developing countries that we have similar interests as us. So it was a combination of all that.
Thank you. My question, next question to you is that we heard about our Prime Minister's commitment, the Panchamrit commitment, but of course it was with a caveat that we will be able to achieve these goals if there is sufficient concessional finance available and technology transfers. So we know from Paris that their 100 billion per year commitment the West could not meet. Is there any sense now that they will be more forthcoming in sharing finance and technology? What is your understanding? You can give your personal view. Means, do you think it will happen or?
Well, I think whatever we have, if past is a sort of showcase for what is to come, our own experience. Let me just tell you what India's experience was. And India's experience, the first set of NDCs that we declared in 2015, we were on track to achieve most of those targets. And this was a widely acknowledged fact. Most of the think tanks and everybody who was following this space put India as one of the few, in fact, the only G20 country. And for achieving those targets, the finance requirement we had projected back in 2015 when we first submitted our NDCs was about $2.5 to $3 trillion till the end of 2030 to achieve those targets. And while not much of this finance has actually come from abroad, there's a problem on how you define this climate finance. And this is important to understanding this question. There is no agreed definition of climate finance. But one thing we are very certain is that most of this resources that were raised to meet these targets, or whatever India has achieved, was primarily domestic finance. So, while there is an expectation that the commitment from the developed countries will kind of go up, and this 100 billion target was talked about even in Glasgow quite a bit. But then there is an acknowledgement. One of the clearest acknowledgements that came in Glasgow was everybody noted with deep regret that this commitment has not been met by developed countries, and neither has this technology transfer taking place. The developed countries have a different definition of climate finance. They have different statistics that they depend on. There is one target, one statistic which the OECD puts out, which they try to rely on, which says that the annual target was somewhere around 80 billion has been given on an annual basis, which most of the rest of the world doesn't agree with. Including us, we see this as an attempt to greenwash. There is this word which is floating around now called greenwash, where everything that you are doing, your traditional development assistance, is now being shown as an assistance for climate action, and therefore you're kind of putting all that as in that category whereby you're showing it as climate finance. So that is something that's a problem. We had put out this time during the discussions, our Ministry of Finance came up with concept papers. They have tabled some definitions, trying to define what climate finance is. We have tabled some proposals, and these will be discussed further in the Standing Committee on Finance under the UNFCCC process. So going forward, will it all come from developed countries? I'm skeptical. That I think most of these resources, at least in India's case, will be domestic. If at all it comes, there will be some amount. I will not say that there will be nothing. I'm hopeful that there will be more, but I don't think we can depend on that in our planning process, which means that we have to plan that most of it will be domestic resources, public or private, or a combination of both. So that is how we will have to, that is how we've planned so far, and that is how we should continue to plan. That's my view.
So you see, we have these Paris NDC commitments, and then I believe that we are now going to augment them. We'll come out with the new sets of commitments.
Yes.
Now, also we have our own voluntary Panchamrit goals. How do you think, as let's say, not as a negotiator, but as a common citizen of India, how do you think achieving these or trying to achieve these will affect our lives? Do you see anything happening to us in the short run, or maybe in the long run? Maybe 2070, maybe none of us would be there. At least the panelists may not be there, but the audience will certainly be there. Now, what let's say in the next 10 or 15 years, what do you see happening to our lives? In terms of opportunities, in terms of where India stands. Where will India then move on to being? We are a leader in many ways, but do you see us setting the narrative in climate negotiations? How do you see India, moving on from Glasgow?
Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting question, Sandeep. I think one of the things now is there is a overall direction in terms of what the government priorities are. And these are these are global priorities. In terms of climate action, I think the move towards achieving low carbon pathways in every industry sector, cutting down emissions, turning towards green growth on green energy. I think these are things which basically create economic opportunities. They show broadly the direction in which the policy will go and where the incentive scheme will lie. I think, so everything now, there's a global sort of, consciousness or awareness that's growing in terms of what is the carbon footprint of every object or every product that we are putting out in the market. So even there is a consumer consciousness which is also growing on that side, that this, whatever my lifestyle, what is the carbon footprint of my lifestyles? In fact, Prime Minister had spoken about this when he articulated this concept of lifestyles for environment, where he's been talking about environmentally sustainable lifestyles, and how the Indian ethos has traditionally, we have kind of been living in harmony with nature, and that is what the Indian philosophy sort of, our idea of life is really rooted in. And therefore, that is, there is a need to kind of, take a relook at that and see how we can apply it in modern lifestyles, where use of energy is increasing. On one hand, you were talking about cutting down at the individual level, your lifestyles, making some behavioral changes so that your product choices are geared towards more climatic sustainable sort of development, and also at the background, you are changing the energy mix, where you are kind of depending more on sort of non-fossil based energy sources, so that whatever energy you're using is clean energy, and also you're trying to kind of cut down and use the kind of energy. The consumption patterns affect the consumption patterns. The consumption patterns is a more difficult thing to achieve, because we are an aspirational country, we are a developing country. There is still a lot of scope for development. There is poverty. So we can expect that this aspirational sort of growth that is there in the economy to increase consumption levels. But at the same time, one of the things that, interestingly, on the NDC side, if you look at one of the parameters that we have put a target for, is achieving a reduction in the emission intensity of GDP, which basically means that it's not proportionally increasing. When GDP is increasing at a certain pace, your energy intensity, your energy consumptions are not kind of going directly proportional to that. So there is a delinking that's happening between the energy usage and this one. And that is an important sort of parameter which reflects an economy-wide sort of consciousness of where this is going. So in the future, I think there is new opportunities which are going to come up. Certainly, I think that is where if you're a student, you're looking at this kind of space, you're looking to build a career in this space. I think there is a lot of need for understanding, both on the scientific level. There's a lot of R&D that's happening just to understand how the adaptation part of it, which basically means that whatever damage has already happened, how do we adapt to it? I mean, how is this affecting your weather patterns, for instance? How is this affecting? So there's a lot of R&D requirement if for a student, if he wants to go in that direction. There is a lot of industry level requirement where you are reworking the old processes and trying to see how can you produce that same product or produce that same service with a much less energy consumption, or much more a low carbon sort of a pathway to achieve the same product or a service, or a better improved sort of a service. So there is a complete reworking of the economy that's happening, and it is global. It is inevitable as far as we can see it. Of course, the efforts have sort of, the impact of COVID on how these efforts, whatever these ongoing efforts were, is yet to be studied. I mean, I think in some ways it has set us back, but it has also kind of accelerated some of these transitions. Maybe, things will become much more clearer as we go along. But I think, there's a reworking that's happening. So you need to gear yourself for that kind of economy. And if you can see it coming, I think, there are great opportunities to be economic opportunities for businesses to adapt to, for people who are looking to work in this space in terms of climate and, sustainable development kind of thing. I think there's a lot of scope.
Good. Thank you. I will come back to you with the question later on. Let me now bring in our another expert, Mr. Koluru Krishnan. I would like to ask you, Srini, just to make all of us remember a question about emissions trading and carbon trading, but I'll ask you later. Let me now bring in Mr. Koluru Krishnan. We are really grateful to you, Mr. Krishnan, for joining us. Mr. Krishnan is a very well-known name in industry name in climate and environment. He has been on this in this area for many years now. He has participated in many climate discussions. At the moment, he is chairman of the FICCI Climate Change Committee. And he also is chairman of a company called CVC India Infrastructure Private Limited. Mr. Koluru Krishnan is an alumni of the IIT system, and he's also active in the Pan IIT system. And amazingly, I have been reading some of your articles, Mr. Krishnan, and you very critically analyze our positions, and it's always constructive criticism, I find, and you set the pathways, what the government can do, what industry can do, and I think that is you analyze things in a very optimistic and positive way, and I enjoyed reading your articles. I will just take a lead from what Srini said about greenwashing. Now, green is the latest buzz. We talk of greenwashing, green energy, green hydrogen. We are going green, but what do you think in terms of green jobs? Because end of the day, if this green transition is happening and it is a jobless transition, then I think countries like India would suffer a lot, and particularly people who have tuned in. More than, I see, 62% are listening to this conversation. Now, I recently read a report, I think it came out only yesterday, from the Green Jobs Council of India, which said that at least 1 million jobs will be created in the renewable energy sector. Srini also mentioned that opportunities are there for us. He mentioned about jobs in climate mitigation, but I also think there is a lot of opportunity for environmental managers in climate adaptation, because how much even we mitigate, the impact of climate change is there for all of us to see, and it is affecting our daily lives. So I would start straight with you, Mr. Krishnan. What impact our Glasgow commitments will have on jobs in India?
Thank you, Sandeep. I will answer your question. Number one, I should add that I have been the founder chairman of the Skills Council of Green Jobs from 2015 to 2021. Just created pre-Paris. So I've been very actively involved in that. Plus, I have been the India chair for BRICS Business Council Energy and Green Economy. The term green economy was added in 2016 under the Indian presidency. And in 2021, under the Indian presidency, we added a few more things. So before getting into that, I'd like to say that when we talk of climate action, there are really twin tracks. One is governmental, the other is industry. Now, Srini has very wonderfully captured the governmental thing, which again has two twin tracks. From the government, it is the intergovernmental, and there is within the country government policies, enablers, etc., which he has covered very well. So I will give my focus on climate action from industry perspective and how that will impact economy. Now, when we talk of green economy, it's essentially a transition of an economy. It's like when a horse cart gave way to a car, it was the transition in mobility. So what does this transition mean? I will cover that very briefly. But coming to your specific thing, let me from industry perspective say, and I've been involved in COPs from 2015, from Paris onwards. I actually have been involved in this sector from Kyoto. And in 2001, I, with my own money, constructed the world's first low-density crop residues power plant, a 4.5 megawatt plant, where I put $5 million in my own money. And that project delivered the world's first gold standard CERs. So I have been actively engaged in the, this thing. As far as COPs are concerned, I was very active in my industry thing. So it's only from Paris where I have been involved, but of course, as industry, as an observer, not as a negotiator. Now, my takeaways of COP, Glaxo 26. Number one, limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is now accepted. It's not being debated. The savage impact of climate change has been witnessed in all parts of the world, including our own country. So, in the past, people used to say, oh, why 1.5? Earlier it was 2, why 2, why not 3, etc. That is not being argued over so much. The second important thing is net zero is on the table. This is the starting of negotiations for anything. Now, someone may say 2050, someone may say 2060, we have said 2070. But I don't think that's important. The date is not important. Important is net zeros on the table. And I will later on come as to how net zero is such a dramatically different implication than what was in Kyoto, renewable energy, etc. Net zero, deep decarbonization drives jobs and businesses in an entirely different fashion. Now, if you see net zero, there's another very, very important aspect which I think is of interest to students. Net zero is a commitment not only of nations. Net zero is a commitment of corporates. They first started 100. Then they made it 100 plus. That 100 plus corporates today is 640 already, managing assets of more than $60 trillion. So if you look at the pressures from stakeholders and shareholders on these corporates which are managing $60 trillion of assets, the funds flow that will take place is far, far more than this $100 billion and intergovernmental. ESG financing is touching $44 trillion. So what will come under intergovernmental is, for me, is not so important. The third, as Srini has very correctly pointed out, is the Paris Agreement rule book has been approved. I mean, we did have discussions on this in Katowice. We were thinking, but honestly speaking, of course, it's a quagmire right now when the pandemic, etc. But they made it so complex. Compensatory adjustments and all that. So I really don't see how much funds is really going to come for a country like India. Africa will definitely benefit. If I had to give an example also, the New Development Bank has already $23 billion. And the New Development Bank has accepted that sustainable development will be a key criteria for funding. So I might expect that as India or Indian industry or business, we may get no money from New Development Bank, then we could probably get from, some of these multilateral under the UN thing. Now, I'd like to kind of switch over from these two things. Like as Srini very correctly said, the general consensus, leave the government negotiators or this thing, general consensus, more hype, little achieved. Greta has said greenwashing and blah, blah, blah. Now, I would rather quote Gautama Buddha, which I did during my Glasgow talks. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. Now, if I was to give you an industry perspective, which again I have used in my Glasgow meetings, I see a synergy between what happened in quality 40, 50 years ago and what is happening in climate action today. If you take 40, 50 years ago, quality was an add-on. Quality was given to those who can afford it. Otherwise, you made a shoddy product. As time went on, it turned out that the customers, the consumers, the society, they started demanding quality. Quality became an absolutely essential ingredient of a product and the services. It was non-negotiable. It's your job to reduce the cost, but you can't say I will give a poor quality product or service. Now that I am seeing creeping into climate action. And I'm talking of a journey from Kyoto 97 to Paris 2015 to Glasgow. So I see this as a sign of optimism for youngsters who are looking at how will it impact. Now, let me also bring in this aspect of deep decarbonization and what it means. You see, in the past, the focus is on renewable energy, which is fine. I mean, you build solar, wind plants, etc. But as long as solar, wind power in a percentile of installed capacity or as a percentile of energy delivered is not very high, it doesn't disrupt the system. Now, when you talk of net zero, you have no option but deep decarbonization. So I just very, very quickly, because I want to stimulate thought process on job opportunities, I will talk with the main sectors where decarbonization comes in. First is the most obvious, power sector. Now, we are very comfortable on power sector. From the government side also, I mean, obviously, I'm in so many committees. I do interface with MNRE, MOP, etc. So it's an 450 gigawatt, ho hi jayega. No problem. We will do it. The issue is this, that we may say 500 gigawatt of non-fossil. But nuclear and hydro will struggle to add 50 gigawatt. So 450 gigawatt, which is separately stated as solar and wind, will have to be the reality. Now, if you add 450 gigawatt of solar and wind in-firm power, the transmission grid won't be able to absorb it. So you need enormous amount of storage. So this will unleash a lot of opportunities for energy storage. There's already talk of aluminum ion, various things. So I think storage will throw up a lot of opportunities. But if you ask me up to 2030, it will not really impact transmission in such a big way. A much bigger advantage will come at user point. It'll come at distribution level. It'll come at distribution level where we'll have variable RE such as solar and wind. We'll have dispatchable RE such as bioenergy. We will have demand side management. Srini is very correct. Changing consumers is this thing, but we use technology, isn't it? We talk of IoT, we talk of so many things nowadays. So we will use technologies to do demand side management to try to balance with this. And then we can bring in energy storage. Now, energy storage at 5 megawatt level is much easier and cheaper than energy storage at, say, a gigawatt level. This is an area where I feel there will be enormous amount of opportunities. And let me tell you, in the BRICS Business Council, all 5 BRIC countries, including China and Russia, said this is the highest priority for NDB to finance. That means decentralized energy generation and how it can be used in mini grids. Now let's come to industry. See, Indian industry actually has been good because we had the Indian Energy Conservation Act of 2001, we had the PAT scheme. Actually, many of our industrial sectors are having far lower emissions than global standards. But if I take the IIA 2021 report, it is forecast that the consumption of energy by Indian industry will by 2040 will grow to 465 million tons oil equivalent. That means 40% of total energy of the country will be utilized by industry. And this excludes the non-energy use of fossil fuels for feedstock. That will have an incremental element of 53 million tons of oil and gas and about 180 million tons of coal. So industry is a major consumer of fossil fuels. Deep decarbonization requires removal of fossil fuels. So removal of fossil fuels requires energy efficiency. I'm keeping renewable energy as taken for granted. Energy efficiency. As important or more important than energy efficiency is material efficiency. How do I get the same output, strength, etc., with low materials? The third, probably one of the most important, is circular economy, which IIFM under MOAF and CC will understand. Waste management. It has enormous opportunity for technology, enormous opportunity for businesses, enormous opportunity for jobs. So the circular economy will also have to come in. It's only when all these will come in that we will find that we'll be able to achieve it. The second thing that is happening is when I come to waste management, the ministry, and of course I'm talking of MOF and CC, they have put extended producer responsibility for plastics, for electronic waste. They've also brought it in for white goods. So this is putting a lot of pressure on companies like Hindustan Unilever, ITC, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Marico, so on and so forth, So I think the potential for the circular economy with the compulsions of extended producer responsibility will create many, many jobs. I got a study done in 2016-17 when I was chairman of Skills Council of Green Jobs, and we did a forecast of 2030 based on Paris Agreement. You're right, solar will create 1 million jobs, but waste and water will create 60% of the total green jobs. 40 million jobs in India, getting into a more organized route, will come from waste and water. So there's a lot of opportunities that, youngsters can go for. And I would like, as you said in the beginning, people should feel free to ask questions. And, Advait can note it down or send it, and people can send me a mail. I'm more than happy to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Fish.
Let me give you 3 more aspects.
Okay, because I would questions have started rolling in, and I would soon bring them up. Please carry on.
Yeah, see, deep decarbonization of transport is also very important. And deep decarbonization of transport is just not limited to electric vehicles. It covers biofuels, it covers an entire spectrum. So that's another thing. Deep decarbonization of buildings. India has to build another 50 billion square meters of residential space and corresponding commercial space by 2040, when our urban population will become 740 million. So deep decarbonization of buildings is another area where there are huge amount of opportunities. Now, for students of IIFM, I'd like to mention this last one, which is my passion subject. So I will not touch upon it more, but it's deep decarbonization in agriculture, carbon removal, nature-based, and land use implications. It is humongous. As it is, India has an NDC of 2.5 to 3 billion tons carbon sink increase. Now, when you have to start meeting deep decarbonization industry and mobility, you cannot meet it without carbon removal. The carbon removal can come from nature-based solutions, or it can also come through technology solutions. I've also been a founding member of the Karnataka State Bioenergy Development Board, and we've done a lot of work on tree-based oil seeds, which could either be in plantation concept in forests, or it can be in agroforestry mode under the nearly 150 million hectares of agricultural land. So students of IIFM can look for huge opportunities also in deep decarbonization of agriculture, land use, and carbon removal. So I just thought I'd flag the areas, and subject is too vast to cover in the chat. More than happy to respond to reply later.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. I will. We have questions which have come up, but I want to take your point of our quality consciousness. It was not there a couple of decades back. Now we are quality conscious, and similarly on green, I say in MEA, where we used to earlier discuss very strategic and political issues. Now most of the time goes in discussing green issues, in SDGs. Strategic partnership on water. We are now doing strategic partnerships on green issues. We have a strategic green partnership with Denmark. We have a strategic water partnership with Netherlands, in which I was involved. And our Prime Minister has clearly given us directions that let us move on these thematic issues with our partners. And then also this green hydrogen and storage and electrolyzer capacities. We are talking of green hydrogen, but electrolyzer capacity in the world is so limited. Again, there is a lot of investment required, and India can actually become a leading producer of electrolyzers. So I will not go into that right now, because we have questions to take. I think first question I will direct to Mr. Krishnan. Mr. I don't know if Mr. or Ms., but Tanuja, I think Ms. Tanuja says that is on green economy. The focus of India currently is whether in promoting industries which grow or contribute directly to the GDP, or protecting the environment, which is the actual green capital of the country. So again, I think she's alluding to this whole debate that we have about development versus protecting the environment. Do you find any change now? Because earlier, we were so much focused on high growth rates and believing that it'll percolate. But I think the problem with that model is that it hurts the environment and people at the bottom of the pyramid who are dependent on the environment, particularly, let's say, tribals on forests. So is this consciousness there today in our industry? What do you think, Mr. Krishna?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, if you talk of industry, now, just like it has been abroad, now, in India, SEBI has increased the BRSR. They've expanded the BRSR, that is Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. The top 1,000 listed companies have to report business responsibility and sustainability reporting. And if they're not meeting the metrics, the shareholders and the stakeholders change them. Actually, one of the big advantages for Glasgow was the corporate earthquake in the energy sector that took place in May 2021. in second fortnight of May 2021, a district judge of Netherlands passed a judgment that Netherlands NDCs become applicable to Shell for Netherlands. The same week, Chevron and Exxon shareholders, they forced exit of directors who were not supporting the transition to clean energy and inducted directors who were supporting clean energy. So this is becoming like non-negotiable, like zero plastic pollution will slowly. Actually, I was very happy with progress in zero plastic pollution, but the pandemic has sent that for a little bit of a. So that's one thing. Second thing, Tanuja, I think you must understand that the days of trying to say, which was India's argument. India was, we were in negotiations from Rio 1992. So we always spoke of equity, we talked of common with differentiated responsibility. Today, if you do a transition to renewable energy, you are actually not really spending more because economies of scale are coming. The same is beginning to be true of sustainable mobility. Resource management and circular economy, you're actually saving money. The only thing is this transition, and the transition needs to be done. So transition requires policy, transition requires technology, transition requires manufacturing engineering facilities, and of course, most important, finance. So I don't think it's there in either or. I think it can. Industry definitely believes it's integrated.
No, thank you. And also, even in India, we are seeing some of our corporates coming up with net zero policies. Our railways have announced net zero by 2030. I think Reliance have come out with their policy. Adani's have come out, and I think other corporates will come out and with their net zero policies. And you mentioned about ESG. Only yesterday we got the news that one of our alumni who runs the impact investment fund called Avishkar, they got a $250 million line from German KfW Bank for ESG impact financing. So again, our alumni and students are involved, and I think what you alluded to in terms of opportunities, if there are 10,000 listed firms who have to do sustainability reporting, you need people who have to make those reports. You need professionals who have to audit those companies. So again, great opportunities.
And industry must comply. For industry to comply, yes. A whole lot of transformation in business required. So absolutely, a whole lot of new jobs.
Absolutely. The next question, Srini, I will address to you. This is from Shakib Nabi. Shakib is asking that most of the financing is directed towards climate mitigation and not towards climate adaptation, whereas the impact of climate change is felt by poor communities, and there is need to direct financing towards climate adaptation. What is your view on that? And is there a possibility of creating a balance between climate mitigation and climate adaptation?
Thanks, Sandeep. I think the fact that there is finance going towards mitigation also is a bit of a myth. I mean, where is this finance coming from? As I said, this finance which is being channeled, when we talk about climate finance in a global sort of, in the context of UNFCCC, we are talking about finance being provided by developed countries towards developing countries. That which is coming towards, there's a very little bit of a trickle that's happening. It's nowhere even close to, whatever that 100 billion target, firstly. And that itself is kind of focused on mitigation efforts. That is true. But, the fact is the overall requirement, like, for instance, when you talk about adaptation actions, when you talk about things like, wastewater management, or what Mr. Krishnan was alluding to earlier, circular economy aspects, you're talking about desertification, arresting desertification, and so on and so forth. These are all adaptation actions. And there is a huge amount of resource that we, as India, is spending towards addressing that. Now, these are all climate adaptation, can be classified as climate adaptation action. So if I would, if you look at the National Climate Change Portal, Climate Action Portal that Ministry of Environment has put up, there's a whole host of things which are happening on the adaptation side. which essentially is coming out of government's own domestic resources. So, I think as far as India is concerned, I think we understand the importance of focusing on adaptation and the need for concentrating resources on that. But these are happening hand in hand. I think, when you put it in the global context, in the international negotiation context, yes, adaptation has not moved with the same sort of focus that mitigation efforts have moved, and neither has finance moved with the same sort of efforts that mitigation has moved. There is too much of emphasis on mitigation efforts and too less on the other aspects of climate change, which is true. I think in the negotiations that is quite obvious, and we would like to see more happening on the climate finance front, on the adaptation front, on the loss and damage front, and so on.
Good.
So I think that's where we are at.
Yeah. So now, I see lots of questions have come in. So my request to the panelists is to be just slightly brief so that we can meet our time period. Question to Mr. Gotru from Pranjal Singhal. Why are most conventions and policies not binding upon states? Why are, for instance, the Paris NDC is not binding, or the COP26?
See, I think it's an interesting question. I think, there was a time when, after Rio, UNFCCC process, we spent a lot of time trying to evolve a model which everybody will accept. The reason why Kyoto failed or Kyoto broke down is because the countries which took on targets under Kyoto refused to kind of, honor them. And basically, their biggest problem in that case, the American opposition was that the so-called major emitters on the planet are exempt under Kyoto. Why are we taking on more commitments than people who are equally polluting? I mean, that is, of course, we don't agree with that because there is a historical emissions sort of aspect misses. But the very briefly, I think, to address this question, the change, the fundamental paradigm shift that happened with Paris was that Paris allowed everybody to take on their own targets. You define your own targets. Everybody acknowledges that climate change is a serious problem and we need to take corrective action. But everybody has different abilities. So there's common but differentiated responsibility was a principle which which was very dear to us, which we've held on to right from the beginning. Paris operationalized this in a very creative way by saying that you bring to the table what you think you can do to address this problem. So therefore, what you have committed, then you are bound to achieve that. That is why the Paris model was acceptable, and that is how we were able to conclude that agreement. And therefore, I think those commitments which countries have made under Paris are nationally determined contributions. That's why it's called NDC.
NDC.
So if you have yourself said that I will abide by this, then you have to abide by this. So in that sense, it is binding.
Yeah, but Prasun, no, I think Pranjal, it is, I think, also the nature of international law that it's very difficult to enforce international law. It is mostly by willingly or voluntarily that countries accept, even verdicts of International Court of Justice. There are or the UNCLOS tribunal. There are countries which have not accepted those verdicts. So it is more voluntary, more willingly, as Mr. Gotru said. These are nationally determined, and when you yourself determine, then there is a greater possibility to comply with them. The next question I'll target to Mr. Koluru Krishnan. This is from Prasun Palit. He's asking, is there a plan to address the challenge of technological lock-in in terms of investments in energy transition? Would you be able to take this?
Yes, I mean, honestly speaking, I don't really see technology as a major issue. I've come from the energy sector in India. You notice that we've always had technology majors willing to set up either technology transfer or, in many cases, joint ventures in India. So technology will flow if there's a market. Technology and funds will flow if there's a market. What Government of India has been doing is it has been announcing very ambitious targets. And of course, when we talk a little informally, people say, look, we need to attract investment, and we want to make India a manufacturing hub also, under the PLI scheme, etc. This will happen because the government has taken a very conscious decision to announce ambitious NDCs for the nation. The government is also, let's say, green hydrogen. You're very right, Sandeep. So green hydrogen, this kind of thing will not happen by 2030, may happen by 2040. But if we keep talking of it in a major way, we stir the pot and there'll be investment flows coming in. So I don't see an issue of India is a very large market. India's energy demand, India's population, India's middle class. So technology flow will take place. The main aspect is like in finance, Srini is very right. The finance that has come is private capital. It has not come in any form of developmental funding or anything. It's saying private capital will continue to flow. Now it is too complex how the flows take place, but I'm not so pessimistic of technology. And I'll only add as a person who has come from engineering this thing that India should not be ashamed to customize technology through application engineering for India's needs. We don't have to always do fundamental R&D in everything. Absolutely no problem if we can do 95% of the work in India and 5% of R&D, let someone spend tens of billions of dollars in R&D. That doesn't mean that we should do our own R&D, but absolutely no problem in entering into a JV also.
Thank you. The next question is from Mohammad Wafi Qureshi. Maybe I will be able to answer this. Is asking about the development of blue economy post COP26 in India. I think the government of India, the Ministry of Earth Sciences, has come out with a discussion paper on blue economy. I think it's there on the website. Consultations are going on, and yes, we are engaging with many partners on blue economy. There is a deep ocean mission which is coming up. I think it was announced in the last budget, so a lot of activity will take place even there. But yes, I think if we have to achieve our goals and objectives of COP26 of green transition, we will be depending a lot on our oceans, and blue economy is certainly going to be much more discussed. And again, as Mr. Krishnan said, the more we discuss, I think it gets into the narrative, the national narrative. I remember last year till maybe 2020, nobody even heard of green hydrogen. Now it's we are discussing MOUs with foreign partners on green hydrogen, and there is a national green hydrogen mission. I till very recently, I must confess, I didn't know that there is gray hydrogen and blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, all kinds of hydrogen. I will see if there are any more questions. Yeah, this is a question from Pratyush Satpati. I think these are the last two questions we'll take. We're running out of time. He says, in the light of the discussion revolving ESG and reporting, I would like to draw the attention towards the recent consultation paper by SEBI in line with IOSCO, which suggests for region-specific ESG metrics and government regulations. In this connected world and collaborative effort, tailored efforts is fine. But on reporting front, shouldn't we be moving towards standardized reporting? I think it's a very technical question. I think, Mr. Krishnan, maybe you will be able to say.
Can I react to it?
Yes, please.
Yeah. There are a number of international standards for ESG. Okay. And they're very large entities also doing this. But in India, I think we will stick to our BRSR. SEBI has guidelines for business responsibility and sustainability reporting. So India will do BRSR. And I'm sure within a matter of a couple of years, BRSR and ESG international reporting will merge. But right now, I think BRSR is good enough for us as India.
Good. There's another question again from, this is from Buddala Rishikesh. He's, I think, also raising a question, maybe not entirely relevant for this forum, but a very important question, which is that India transited from agriculture to service economy, and we missed the manufacturing bus. And green economy and AI and robotics and all this will benefit the highly skilled people in India. But what about low-paying jobs, and have we given up manufacturing? I don't think so, Budala, because if you see the government's policy of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think there is a deep consciousness within our government industry that the only way to create jobs is to get into manufacturing, and we are getting into. There are these PLI schemes that have come out where we're incentivizing manufacturing in India. The fact that we will manufacture doesn't mean that we will not be manufacturing in a green way. And I think most of the emission is from as far as I know, is from energy and transportation and some of these heavy energy intensive sectors like fertilizers and cement and steel. So the focus will be on decarbonizing them. But I think there is equal emphasis on manufacturing, because we realize that jobs will come from there, and there is this urban migration happening, and people in urban settings will look for jobs in manufacturing. So I think that focus is clear, and there is understanding there in government.
Sandeep, I'll just give a 30-second add-on.
Yes, please.
There's 10 million MSMEs in manufacturing employ 30 million people. There's a study made that 60 million tons oil equivalent decarbonization take place, and we are working on an MSME decarbonization. So we are studying the entire spectrum. Very valid question, but no, MSMEs are not ignored, and green economy covers the entire spectrum. So definitely it creates a lot of low-end jobs.
I'll take one last question. We are running out of time. From Shakib Nabi, he wants to understand the political economy behind loss and damage not being acknowledged as a mechanism to address climate impact. Srini, would you be able to take this question?
Yeah. I think, this is one of the things that has not got much attention in the climate negotiations. And I think that's a widely acknowledged fact. And the fundamental problem that everybody is looking at is how do you assess loss and damage that has already happened due to climate change over a last several sort of decades. And is there a sort of monetarily, can we put a value on the amount of damage that has happened, loss and damage that's happened? Now, this is if you're doing global discussions on this, then you have to kind of find common platforms, common definitions on what is this, how do you assess it. So I think there is some work that's been done, and this time in Glasgow, there was a decision on loss and damage to provide some sort of financial assistance to this, to activating this Santiago network, which was basically created as a network of experts to discuss and assess the extent of loss and damage. So I think there's some incremental movement that has happened, but in the larger scheme of things, it was, I think, it wasn't as much as we had hoped that there would be. But these are issues which are difficult to progress in these discussions. I don't think that people are not acknowledge this. There is a strong voice. It has now become a part of the climate discussions, and therefore it is progressing, but not at the speed with which many of us would like to see. I think that's where it is.
Thank you. One last question which I wanted to ask you, which I mentioned before. Is emissions trading going to come to India? Is the government of India thinking of an emissions trading?
It's already here. It's okay. Actually, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has already created a platform where companies are able to kind of, register the savings in terms of emissions that they have, and the credits which are, they are actually being traded as we speak. Now, one of the things at COP was that, under Kyoto, under the clean development mechanism of Kyoto, we had accumulated several, millions of credits over a period of time. And whether we can transfer that into the new system, which is the Paris regime. So, and that has happened. And there was a cutoff year which was acceptable to us. I think majority of those credits which were under Kyoto had now been transferred. So we will continue to be able to trade. It's catching on. It's sort of, once they, I think they notify it, and they kind of, their idea was to kind of, expand this all over the country, and kind of, create a platform where there is a sort of a exchange where you can buy and trade these credits. I think that there is some more work that is being done on that front. But there is a platform which is already operational as far as India is concerned. It's just that, not many people outside this, I think people who are not watching this space are probably not aware, but it has been happening for a while.
Just a 30-second supplement. Today morning, 10:30 to 11:30, there was a stakeholders meeting on carbon pricing in India.
Oh,
MOF and CC and BE. So Steve is very right.
Wonderful.
It's work in progress. I think we will progress.
Just as I was winding up, one last question has come in. I will ask Mr. Krishnan to answer it and then also say his concluding remarks, which is you mentioned this TBOS, tree-based oilseeds, and tree-based agriculture. So it seems there is a form. We are working on forming 10,000 forest producers organizations. So Sagar is asking whether these organizations could be pushed towards adopting large-scale tree-based agriculture. So could you answer this and also then say the last words,
No.
particularly if you could focus on opportunities for jobs for our graduates?
No, I would really love to have some association with, the students and IIFM General, because you see, in 2012 and 2013 as KSPDB, we spent 1 full year with NABARD to try to get a financing for tree-based oilseed, because you need financing for it. And I think the time is ripe. At that time, we didn't have this NDC, we didn't have this nature-based carbon removal. Today, if there can be some qualified people like from IIFM, and they can prepare some project reports for carbon removal, nature-based solutions. One is, of course, some financing that could come from the government itself. But I think there could be a lot of ESG financing coming in, because people will need to show that they are supporting things. I think it's a wonderful area which has enormous potential and very, very satisfying.
Thank you.
And as far as job opportunities are, just like our, the students realize, where has India been competitive? First in the Gulf market from engineering and construction capabilities. Then it came to IT and digital technologies. Let me tell you, transition to green economy is essentially leading to a decentralized architecture for production and consumption. It will be facilitated by digital technology. It will be facilitated by customized engineering and construction. So it will create tens of millions of jobs in India. It will also create, and we have done a lot of studies of entrepreneurial opportunities. Now, as Skills Council a Green Job, we are doing a study supported by JP Morgan Chase. So that study will be available in about a few months' time. But let the students feel free to ask questions. More than happy to mentor.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. Our Dean and Acting Director, Mr. Yadav, has tuned in. So I would request him to invite Mr. Krishnan to IIFM so that he could interact with the students and see how our students can fit into this new green economy sectors. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. Thank you, Srinivas, for sparing your time on a weekend joining us. And over to you, Advait.
Thank you, Sandeep. It was indeed amazingly, informative for us, and many of these things were new to me as well. And so this was a very learning experience. I'm really grateful to all the three of you for doing this, especially to Sandeep for the leadership, getting these leadership dialogues going at IIFM. Is there anything else that Manmohan Saab, would you like to say something, sir? So I suppose he's yeah. So thanks very much, everyone, and I'm looking forward to this, and we'll definitely call Mr. Krishnan over here at IIFM once the COVID thing goes away. And thank you all. I think we can stop here.
Just wanted.
Yeah, sir. Sir, please go ahead.
I think
So, Professor,
some issues.
There seems to be some connectivity issue. I just wanted to thank Sandeep and the two panelists for this wonderful interaction. And I think a lot of understanding the students will get as to what goes behind the negotiations, and that's very important. And we look forward to have Mr. Krishnan in our dialogue in future, as well as in case he can mentor the students. We have a entrepreneurship cell, so we'll definitely invite him. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So where will be the recording will be available?
I send it to the entire batch once I get it. I'll send the link to everyone.